Alleluia. The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus entered a village where a woman whose name was Martha welcomed him. She had a sister named Mary who sat beside the Lord at his feet, listening to him speak. Martha, burdened with much serving, came to him and said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me by myself to do the serving? Tell her to help me." The Lord said to her in reply, "Martha, Martha, you are anxious and worried about many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, and it will not be taken from her." The Gospel of the Lord. Today is the feast of St. Francis of Assisi, and St. Francis of Assisi is kind of a sign of contradiction in the midst of our modern age, and in fact, many of the ways that he is portrayed is actually contradictory to who St. Francis was. And many people have this image of St. Francis that basically he was all about love of animals, right, and a lover of nature, right? Some people resonate with him more because when they think about the church, they think the church is too caught up on all these, peripheral things like the liturgy and stuff like that. We really just need to be caring about the environment and caring about the poor and all these social issues. Right? But it's kind of surprising when you read the letters of St. Francis, about 90% of his letters were condemnations and critiques of priests who were not celebrating the Mass with enough reverence, right, and effort. He was extremely passionate about the liturgy. Some people think that St. Francis was more concerned with serving the poor and loving all people and accepting all people as opposed to being a great evangelist. One of the famous phrases that is often attributed to him but is false, right, is speak the gospel at all times, but when necessary, use words. Right? St. Francis never actually said that. Right? Now, even though he did love the poor, even though he did love everyone he encountered, right, he was also extremely passionate about evangelization. He went all the way over into the Middle East and personally went and tried to convert the Sultan, right, of the Islamic Empire, knowing full well that most likely what would happen when he went there, if he was unsuccessful, is he would be killed, right, and put to death. Now, his personality was so charismatic and the Sultan was so edified by his presence that he let him leave safely, right, but he was not able to convert him. But he was very passionate about evangelization. He didn't think anybody should just stay in their own religion, whatever they want to believe. And he was passionate about the one truth of the gospel. Sometimes when St. Francis is talked about as just a lover of joy, right? Again, sometimes when we think about the gospel, we want to reduce it to certain things, right? And talk about all about the joy and kind of the happy forms of the gospel. And in the midst of our modern age, right, we have this idea of the prosperity gospel, that God just wants us to be happy and full of joy and all these different things. And there's not something particularly wrong about that, but what we should remember is that St. Francis, even though he saw that, he still saw the need for penance and suffering. Right? St. Francis lived an extreme life of poverty and penance. He was a man who suffered. He had the stigmata, right? He's the first saint that we know of, right, in recorded history that had the wounds of Jesus. Right? So even in our modern age, so many of these modern ways that we tend to oppose certain things in Catholicism or in the church, it's important that we don't ever reduce St. Francis to those reductions. He never chose one or the other. He chose everything. Right? Not only did he love the poor, he also loved the liturgy. Not only did he love the ideas of social justice and those sorts of things, but he was also passionate about evangelization. Right? All of these things fit together in St. Francis. And I think that's really at the heart of how to understand him. Right? He chose all. If there's any charism that I think we can learn from St. Francis, it was extravagance. He was often seen as too extreme. In fact, he was so extreme, he was seen that way by his father, right? He took a lot of his father's money because he was trying to rebuild a church right there in Assisi. And he got in trouble for it. And he was rebuked by his bishop, and his father actually put him under house arrest for a year. Right? All throughout his life, he did all sorts of things that we would see as rash, right? Or extreme, right? The very extremes that he chose. It's because of that he stood out so much in his age. He was such a radical example. Right? So radical that many people thought it was sinful and rigorous. I think there's something beautiful about that we can all take, right? St. Francis was so full of love and gratitude to God that he was extravagant with how he gave it all back. He could not be poor enough, right? He could not be in love enough. The Mass could not be taken seriously enough. The poor could not be served enough. He had to be completely extravagant in everything. I think there's a lot we can take from that as modern-day Catholics. So often as modern-day Catholics, we are the opposite of extravagance. Right? We like to live in our comfortable little bubbles, and we like to put our faith in a box, something that we practice one day a week. We don't want to have the uncomfortable conversations of trying to evangelize other people, right, out of fear of rejection. Even when it comes to the Mass, how many Catholics approach the Mass with such a minimalistic attitude? Not singing the songs, not singing the prayers, not coming early to prepare themselves. I love how many modern Catholics today, I love how there's a lot of reverence that is coming back to the church and how people take communion and other such things, right? We should be extravagant in our devotions to God. Right? Extravagance is one of the main charisms that we can learn from St. Francis.